Hey, how's it going out there, folks? Welcome back here to a start of the work week. Monday has come upon us already. About 12:03 p.m. here. September 23rd, 2024 is the date. So local time in California, 12:03 p.m. afternoon. Hope everyone's enjoying their Monday out there. We're going to start off with earthquake activity here in California. It looks like it's ramping up slightly here in the last 24 hours with a handful of earthquakes above the 2.5 threshold. The most recent one, a 2.6 up around the Redding area. The Southern California earthquake area, 2.9, just around the Long Beach area, off of the Santa Monica area, the Santa Monica fault. There's a Malibu fault over here. This earthquake in an area that we really haven't seen earthquake activity here recently. Obviously, we've seen some around or we've had a few earthquakes around the Puente Hills Stress Fault underneath downtown Los Angeles area. That's a little bit further up here. So now we're getting some of these other fault systems hit. This appears to be off of the Newport Inglewood Rose Canyon Fault. I can't really zoom in much closer, or potentially the Chinook fault. Chinook, it looks like. Goodness. So anyway, California's got so many fault systems out here, it's a little scary. Southern California specifically. And that's where we've been seeing a lot of earthquake activity here in the past couple months. Today, a 2.9, a new earthquake in a new area. That's the only one so far. Again, it's underneath this area of the Inglewood region and a highly populated area. Nothing going on across the Malibu Coast Fault or the Puente Hills Stress Fault. Malibu Coast Fault looks pretty quiet there today. One earthquake, looks like there was another earthquake, 1.6, following this event this morning, literally 2 minutes later, further up north. That one appears to be on the Inglewood Fault, Newport Inglewood Fault. So I've noticed this pattern here of pressurization up against the plate boundary. And it makes sense here where the general stress is coming from, the interaction of the Pacific plate and the North American plate boundary, right? But look at all these ridges out here, these fault systems here, that show that the strain builds up in this type of fashion here. And that's where we've been seeing a lot of the earthquake activity ramp up here recently, mainly across the Garlock Fault southward for Southern California, and a little bit up north here as well. And that would explain why we're seeing strain, earthquake strain up here across the Garlock Fault shear zone, because it's pretty much, it seems like it's locked out here, right about the Big Bend area of the Garlock Fault shear zone southward. But some of that pressurization is picking up here on this little piece of land that looks like an arrow, a left-pointing arrow here. It's adding strain up here across this shear zone. And the only thing I can think of here is that this whole area is under a bunch of pressure, plate tectonic pressure out here. And of course that would be associated with the San Andreas Fault. We're seeing numerous other small fracture areas, like we've been seeing the last couple months, show elevated activity. And it's just a sign here of the extreme pressure on the San Andreas Fault itself. So got to watch that. Definitely have to watch that. A handful of smaller quakes out here as well. In the Fontana earthquake swarm area, looks like this is starting to kick back up again as well. Nothing above 2.5, right? So when you remove all the earthquakes under 2.5, it looks like California is having a quiet day, but that's not the case. We got the earthquake activity here across the Inglewood area around the one of these other fault systems here that really hasn't seen a lot of earthquake activity recently. The Fontana area, yes, they've had a number of earthquakes out here. We would have to go back beyond the last 30 days to see the elevated activity out here. At least in that region, in the last 30 days around this area of the Fontana earthquake swarm, which is further west, that is still showing up here in the last 30 days with about 56 earthquakes. So maybe it looks like a new area here around this region that's seeing some seismic swarming. I really don't think that this area specifically right here had any earthquake activity in the last couple months. It's been this region. Got a little distracted there. The Rancho Cucamonga area up north, this is our swarming area over the last month. So this is actually a new swarming area, somewhat same location, roughly about 5 miles from each other in that swarm fashion. There's a lot going on out here right now, folks, and it's kicking back up, it appears, today. This current ongoing earthquake swarm, 1 mile south of Fontana. Largest earthquake so far in the sequence is going to be a couple 2-pointers out there. Very shallow earthquake activity here, just below the surface, anywhere between 1 to 2 miles there underneath this area. Not big earthquake activity, but it's a sequence of earthquakes that we're seeing here over the last couple months that are leading up to the San Andreas Fault here. Or it could be any of these other faults that are well overdue. One thing I've noticed for sure is that various areas are kicking up. It's not just one specific area of earthquake activity. We're getting these areas that haven't been hit in a little while. Then we'll go through a little quiet period like we've seen here over the last 4 days, right? Probably 4 days, 5 days of quietness. Now it's starting to kick back in new areas of activity. Like down here across Inglewood, and a new separate swarm here east of our previous swarm that we've seen here in the last 30 days. So things are kicking up again in various different areas. And one of these times when the clock comes back around again here, the pressure, it could trigger something out here bigger. And it's all pretty much pointing towards the San Andreas Fault here on the large-scale basis. I've seen the activity halt roughly about, remember the 5.2 we've seen back in what's been past, almost coming up on 2 months now, up there around the Bakersfield area. Let me double-check my mic, make sure it's up. Audio, yep, we're good. And that area is just north here of this Garlock Fault shear zone where we would expect to see some strain due to the overall plate boundary strain. A lot of activity up north here. We've seen a trail of earthquake activity here towards the Ridgecrest area. That's been, looks like it's still ongoing here today with its own little separate swarm. And you can pretty much follow that fashion there, an arrow. And this inside this area, inside this line between the Garlock Fault shear zone and the San Andreas Fault, we haven't seen a lot of earthquake activity. Minimal, some microquakes across areas where we'd expect some of the strain to transfer to immediately off the plate boundary, and that's going to be these faults here just off the southern branch of the San Andreas Fault. So, this is just the last 30 days. You can see that well-defined arrow down here. More specifically, though, right up against the southern branch of the San Andreas Fault. That's a fact. Last 24 hours actually have been quite active out here across the southern branch of the San Andreas Fault as well, with a handful of smaller microquakes. Now, got to remember, just because they're not above 2.5, it does not mean that it's not an earthquake, and it doesn't have a purpose, right? Obviously, there's a lot of earthquake activity out here in the microquake department, and there's still earthquakes. And they're all pointing to the same feature that I've been seeing over here the last couple months, and that is the San Andreas Fault. A lot of stuff leading to it, I believe. We're starting to see some signs. Just on it here, a couple smaller earthquakes from yesterday and today. As you can see, zoom in here just a little bit. 0.8 this morning. Looks like one just after midnight. Further down south here near the Banning area, that is just off the San Andreas Fault, the southern segment, by literally a couple miles as well. Seen a handful of earthquakes in this region this morning already. And San Jacinto Fault Zone down here looks fairly active. This is almost always active, though. That and the Elsinore Fault over here. A couple different secondary fault systems here on the Pacific side of the plate boundary. The Salton Sea, pretty quiet. Nothing going on across there for now. It's all been focused up north here. Roughly Garlock Fault shear zone southward. So we'll keep an eye on today. It looks like we're definitely kicking things up out here in a couple different regions. Some areas that we've seen earthquake activity before in the last couple months, some not so much, like this activity over here around the Inglewood area near the Los Angeles airport. Goodness. So watch this very closely here today. Up north, we've seen a handful of earthquakes as well around the Parkfield segment of the San Andreas Fault, which is that's a creeping segment. Parkfield's going to be a little bit further down let's see here. I wish that thing would just stay up right here. It almost looks like there's a gap there between the creeping segment and the Parkfield section. But on the southern end here, the extreme southern end of the Parkfield section, we have a couple smaller earthquakes here in the last hour and one from early this morning. There's been a little chat here that if we see a 6-pointer on here, and we're pretty much overdue for a 6-pointer, they kick up about every 20 to 22 years or so, and the last one was back in 2004, 2006, if I remember right. I think 2004. There's been a little bit of chat, though, on if we get a 6-pointer down here on the southern segment, that could be just enough to unzip the rest of the plate boundary down here, the San Andreas Fault. The southern segment, that's very capable right now of producing an 8.1 earthquake. That is not a joke. That is the magnitude that seismologists, geologists alike tend to believe and feel that that's how much strain has been built up here across the southern segment. A little bit further up north along the creeping section of the San Andreas Fault. This is earlier this morning for a 2.9. Handful of smaller quakes out there as well. The latest of 1.7 within the vicinity of that 2.9. And well, watch Nevada. It looks like Nevada's starting to kick up a little bit as well out here across western Nevada. They tend to coincide with the earthquake activity uptick here across Southern California. As noted in the past, we've seen a lot of earthquake activity here, along with movement in Southern California recently. So we'll keep an eye on it. Definitely kicking up here. Northern California, Bay Area, fairly quiet. Only a handful of very small earthquakes. Northern California, outside of Redding. This is the northern end of the Sacramento Valley. The majority of these quakes here relatively shallow, aside from a 2.2 underneath Whiskeytown. There's fault systems up here, not associated with Mount Shasta. That's well up north. Mount Lassen over here as well, not associated with that. But aside from that, somewhat quiet there in Northern Cal. There's that swarm of earthquake activity out here near the Desert Air area. Near the Yakima Ridge, east of Yakima here, a little distance, at the very edge of this mountain range. Now, I was looking to see if this may be volcanic, but I don't feel it is. 43 earthquakes in the last 24 hours here. And if we were to include the last 7 days, that brings it up to 67 earthquakes in a separate swarm. A swarm. Really no main quake out there. A main quake would be, say, a 3 or a 4, and then we get a whole bunch of these little aftershocks occurring following the main quake. But that's not the case here. This is just a bunch of various magnitude earthquakes all occurring in the swarm fashion here, and it kicked up pretty much big time last night. There was a little bit of earthquake activity there on the 21st. So yeah, actually over the last 3 days here, we've seen that on the uptick out here. And a little uncertain onto where it's leading to. There's no historical data out here in terms of 4.5 and above. So a little odd. I don't think there's any fracking operations out there. I'm not seeing anything. Those look like maybe not windmills, but I don't know what those are. Hard to say what that is, but I don't see any type of fracking operations out there. Little odd earthquake activity, to say the least. Yeah, pretty obvious. So look at California out here. You know, when you look up close, you think, man, this is a long ways from Los Angeles over here to Las Vegas. But on the bigger scale of things, this is one plate, the Pacific Plate, and the North American Plate up here, massive plate. So this little bitty area, that really means, you know, that it means a lot to us, right, in terms of coverage and distance. But this is just a small fraction of the plate boundary out here that can produce an 8.1. So you see these signs outside of the plate boundary area indicative of the strain and stress that's coming on to California right now. It's definitely kicking up across this general area. So got to be on guard here today. Hopefully, well, I'm going to be down here. I'm going to be down here in a couple days, checking out some various fault systems in the landslide area around the Rancho Palos Verdes area, and maybe stop in and have some seafood up there around Malibu. Quite a few folks been recommending some places up there. Appreciate it. But we're going to go down there mainly on a business trip to check out, talk to people, see how they've been dealing with the recent erosion and landslide activity there across this region. Also around the Malibu area where we're seeing a lot of earthquake activity recently. on the Malibu Coast Fault. That's capable of producing a large quake in itself. I mean, it's all over the place where we're expecting some larger activity. Anything could go at any time, including while we're down there. But we'll be live streaming and documenting our travels and journey down there. All right, away from California, minimal movement up here at Yellowstone National Park. I'm not seeing too much activity going on there. Let me double check. This is a seismograph station there from Yellowstone Maple Creek area. Today's date, not a whole lot of earthquake activity there across that station. Maybe a couple smaller earthquakes here. This is a distant earthquake, it looks like. Not for sure exactly where. I don't see anything in the vicinity, and the largest quake here in the last 24 hours is going to be the 23rd. Wow, we really haven't had a lot of activity here yet today. It's going to be this little 4.5. All these bigger quakes here from yesterday. Right now, the brunt of the target, so to speak, if I were to watch an area, definitely lighten up California right now. That's pretty obvious. Texas area, oil fields getting hit with some smaller microquake activity. A lot of this here from yesterday. Rest of the country, pretty quiet. Nothing going on out there across the eastern portion of the country. The region around St. John's area continues to see a little bit of earthquake activity out here, with the latest being a 4.4. Now, this area has seen another earthquake, had seen another earthquake here yesterday, 4.4. It is a major subduction zone capable of producing some large damaging earthquakes out here, and they've historically has been quite active. As you can see here on the map, got 4.5 and above. Some larger quakes out here as well, up in the 6 and 7 range. There's a handful of earthquakes out across the Puerto Rico Trench as well. Definitely getting a squeeze put on here across the Caribbean plate. Some movement further back here across the Middle America Trench from yesterday and today. That should keep the squeeze going on for the Caribbean plate, so we'll keep an eye on that area as well. Far as, well, there's a 5.2 coming in. I was just going to talk about New Zealand. Hasn't quite unzipped out here across this area. Most of the larger scale movement has been limited here to the extreme southern end of the Kermadec Trench northward. This is a fairly deep earthquake, 256 kilometers there for a 5.2 earthquake right about here at the southern end of the Kermadec Trench. New Zealand has been sliding away a little bit far as avoiding some full rupture out here with some smaller threes. Doesn't mean that that's limiting the potential out here for some larger activity. Just most of the movement here has been consistent with some threes and twos up and down the plate boundary. Nothing yet in terms of larger scale release. Older quake activity up north along the Tonga Trench area. These red rings indicative of older quakes from yesterday. Newer quake activity, I guess this 5.2 would cover today's event for the largest earthquake. Aside from that, with some older movement up here across the Java Trench. With that 4.5, Japan area seen some older movement here from yesterday. A couple fours up there. Mongolia area 4.5, and the Mediterranean continues to see some elevated activity here in the last 24 hours around the Aegean Sea. Nothing big, but a noticeable uptick here in the last couple days for sure. There's an earthquake way up north here of Iceland, 5-pointer from yesterday. Nothing new stirring up out there for now. But what's that? Is that 6-pointer? That should be off of the map now, right? Let's bring that down just a little bit. Oops. 1 second here. Last 24 hours should be right about, well, I don't know. Maybe that's not a 6-pointer down there. It's supposed to be last 24 hours somewhere around there. Or maybe a little bit less. Yeah, there's that 5.4 from yesterday. So that's what we're seeing there on the globe. Down here. Yeah, so that's about right. Okay. Hawaii, not so much going on out there right now in terms of earthquake activity following the short period of eruption out here across the Middle East Rift Zone. Latest check here of the update. Let's double check that, see what we have. They switched it back to a yellow, an advisory from an orange and a watch. So the eruption has ended. Only a couple of intermittent small spots of residual glow could be detected on the flow field last night. Excuse me. This update was put out this morning, by the way, 8:38 local time, Hawaii. So nothing major going on. They obviously feel like maybe this last couple of Fisher events there has relieved some of the strain that built up magma underneath the region. I don't know if that's enough, though, to put this off for an extended period. Maybe temporarily there for a couple weeks, but I guess we're going to see what happens. By the way, deformation data up at the summit area. Let's see what we got. Not a whole lot going on. Fairly stationary. Here's our most recent loss of magma from the summit to the Middle East Rift Zone. And we're just kind of staying consistently stationary for now. All right, what else we got here? Make sure we're still live. Still doing good. Thanks for the new subscribers jumping in on board. Appreciate it. Space weather real quick. Little M flare it looks like this morning. Very low grade M flare. Not seeing a whole lot of activity there for now. But I have a feeling we're going to get quite active in the coming days. And the reason why I say that is because there's a couple large active regions here. Here's the first one coming around the bend. This is the area right here that produced the M flare yesterday. So that's worthy to watch as well. But I think these other two that are coming back around the bend look fairly complex. Look at those magnetic arches right there. That's absolutely beautiful magnetic lines and arches up here in that sunspot. Not quite visible yet in terms of complexity. Let's see if we got any type of view on it. Just barely. Just barely. From here, it still looks fairly complex, but we won't get a little bit better. We'll get a better view here in the coming days. But aside from this one, there is another sunspot behind here as well. So we're going to have a trail roughly starting right about here back eastward that is going to have a couple different sunspots there that could harbor some stronger flare potential in the coming days. Right now, flare threat's only at 5%, 35% for M flare. Yeah, that's for the X flare for 5%. C flare at 99% chance, and I think those numbers will go up here once they get into a little bit more of a position there of observance. Look at that beautiful area out there. No major roars in the forecast for now. Things pretty quiet in that department. We'll definitely keep an eye on it. All right, hurricane activity. Well, get ready. Potential tropical cyclone 9 gearing up a little bit. Let's see what we got right now. Let's bring up the warnings here, forecast line. This is from the National Hurricane Center, NOAA.gov site, talking about hurricane venturing into the Gulf of Mexico, aiming right at the Panhandle, Florida. The models have been pretty consistent here with a strong hurricane entering into this area, Category 3 at least. I'll show you the maps here in a minute where it forecasts that, but going to rapidly develop once it gets past this little break here where we're currently seeing hurricane watches, tropical storm warnings up there. Looks like maybe Tuesday night, Wednesday morning for this area, but landfall roughly in the Florida Panhandle area. Going to happen sometime probably afternoon time period for Thursday of this week, and could be a big deal. Let me bring up the Tropical Tidbits page here and show you guys the storm. There it is, just starting to get geared up a little bit. The infrared imagery. See what we got here. Yeah, look at that. Starting to get a little bit of organization there in that cluster of thunderstorms. It is over some very warm waters. Now here's the expected. Ooh. Yikes. That has gone up tremendously. Are we on the right one? Let me double check that. Yeah, this is for the potential hurricane here in the Gulf, but look at those models. They have gone way up overnight. Some of those going up into the category 5 strength. Now, this is not just a guesstimate, on some model. These are a bunch of different weather models combined into one for a model intensity guidance. Most of the models are in agreement with a category 3, category 2, category 3 level. Notice some down here, category 1, and even a tropical storm. But we do have some hints here of it getting stronger. This wasn't like that last night. And that would not be a good thing. So we're going to have to watch that pretty closely as we come into time frame with a Thursday afternoon landfall. This thing should rapidly intensify and head straight up into the Florida Panhandle. That's one thing that the model agreements can all agree on, it looks like, in this area right here around the Panhandle, and then moving off northward, bringing with it quite a bit of rainfall. But that's a little scary there, seeing that strong. So we'll check back on it as we get a little bit closer. Let me check out the latest GFS model here, down here. Yeah, it's hard to say. That's roughly around the category 2, 3. And this GFS model showing maybe a little bit more eastward track. Again, these models can change in the blink of an eye, but they've all been consistent now with a tropical system hitting the Florida area. How strong? We'll have to watch this closely over the next couple days. We'll definitely check back on it, folks. It's 5.1, Kermadec Islands area. Again, 115 miles deep into the Kermadec Trench. Goodness. Pretty deep earthquake. All right, folks, keep an eye there on California. Rocking and rolling out there a little bit today. A lot of uptick, a noticeable uptick. And a couple different swarming areas out there around Los Angeles today. So we'll be watching it. Have a good Monday, and we'll catch you guys back out here a little bit later on this afternoon. Take care.